So, welcome everyone. Tonight's topic of conversation in the healing room is energy medicine. And we've spoken about energy in this group before in the past. And so, just to bring it up again, everything in this universe has a frequency, has a vibration. Everything is vibrating at a particular frequency, and that vibration then creates the third dimensional world. That vibration, when it intensifies, when it materializes, becomes this world. So, what is the origin of this world is energetic. So, energy is primary and form is always secondary. In the Newtonian model, we're told that it's all about the physical world. That's what's real, is that which can be perceived and experienced through the five senses. Everything else is you cannot determine. Scientifically, we cannot prove. So we have gotten caught up in the third dimensional world, thinking this is the primary thing to focus on. But the reality is that before this world came into form, first there was a blueprint, there was an idea, there was a thought. And from that thought came this world. The material world was born or birthed. And yet we are constantly told, for example, by our medical system, that the cause of our dis-ease is some sort of germ or pathogen, a bacteria, a virus. But that's just one theory, and it's called the germ theory by Pasteur. Louis Pasteur came up with this theory. But at the same time, there was someone else, Béchamp, with another theory. And that theory was the terrain theory, that the terrain is primary, the germ is secondary. So it's another way to say that one's internal state of consciousness is generating one's physical reality. And apparently, at the end of his life, Pasteur said, it's all wrong. It's not the germ. The germ is nothing. The terrain is everything. So perhaps even he understood it by the end of his life. But here we are trying to make sense of things, in these bodies, especially when we have these experiences called disease with these various symptoms. We're trying to understand, how do I navigate my mind and my body when something arises, when many things may arise? How do I deal with it? How do I work with energy? And energy is primary and the body is secondary when I'm, for example, having a rash on my body. How do I deal with it? Because all I want is to get rid of that rash. That is my focus. That is my intent. Well, there's many ways to deal with that rash, right? If one wants to get rid of it and do the quick route, then one can go to Western medicine and suppress it. Use some cortisone, a cream, to put on top of, for example, if it's on the chest, you put it on the chest, and voila, you'll notice that the rash will disappear. But if form is secondary and energy is primary, and that rash disappears, what just occurred actually? What occurred is I moved that energy somewhere else because I didn't acknowledge the energy. I simply acknowledged the form, the symptom. And so I got rid of that symptom. And in Western medicine, when you do that, it's called a cure. But after that suppression of that rash with cortisone, then a lung imbalance arises, right? Like asthma. So in Western medicine, there's no connection whatsoever between that rash, the suppression of that rash, and a new disease called asthma. There's no connection. But in holistic medicine, specifically in homeopathy, we know that the energy of that rash has now gone deeper into the physiology and into the energetic system because it was previously superficial on the skin, on the surface. So what's superficial is the skin, the arms, the legs, the feet, the furthest away from the organs, the important organs, the brain, the mind. But now we move this symptom from the chest, from the skin to the lungs, which means we're moving in the direction of chronic disease. Every time we suppress an energy in the system, we are moving towards the creation of chronic disease. And so here we are in this day and age where we are seeing so much chronic illness now, even in children, because the Western medical model is a suppressive model dealing with results, but not causes. Not the cause. So the cause of the material world is always subtle, invisible. It is a vibration, it is an energetic aspect. And so if we truly want to heal this physical body, we're going to have to understand the body through the symptoms. The symptoms are not the cause. The symptoms are not the disease. The symptoms are simply information informing us of the disease pattern, right? Pattern, frequency. Everything is a frequency. So energetic medicine is interested in understanding what is this frequency that we are looking at, that we are dealing with, that I may understand what the remedy could be to counteract that frequency. Right? What is the understanding is what is going on with these symptoms that I may understand the frequency of this imbalance. That when I understand that, I may input into the field of consciousness a different frequency that will counteract the vibration of dis-ease. And so we have various energetic medicines like homeopathy and flower essences that when it is put into our being, helps to neutralize the undercurrent, the underlying cause of dis-ease. And it doesn't do it by getting rid of it per se. It doesn't do it by suppressing it. It does it through a form of expression, integration, not fighting, but absorbing, working with, integrating all that's unfolding inside. And so, let me see if I can give you an example. So if I have, for example, a personality, if I'm a personality that tends to be impatient, intense, type A personality, likes to drink, likes spicy foods, tends to be argumentative, likes to exercise. If I have a personality like that, a type A personality like that, then my goal is to observe all of those personality traits and symptoms, along with any physical symptoms, to get a picture of another frequency that when I insert it will neutralize the person's behavior. Because if I keep moving in that direction with that level of intensity, that level of fire, for example, I'm going to create a certain dis-ease later on down the road. So our symptoms are always informing us early on of what's to come, because it's like a moving entity. It is accumulating all of this energy. So, but if I can intercept this frequency early on, say in childhood, and I can give a child a remedy that matches the child's symptoms early on, then that will prevent specific issues later on in life. It will prevent chronic illness later on in life. So it behooves us to begin to do the inner work, to begin to observe ourselves, to see what are the patterns in my life, what are the habits that I'm noticing that are perhaps creating dis-ease, DIS-EASE. That's not in alignment with the higher part of myself. That's not in alignment with health and well-being. What are the patterns? And then when you notice that, you begin to shift those patterns, because it'll shift your frequency from dis-ease to health. So energy medicine is that form of medicine that when we insert it into the field of consciousness, what we're doing is we are activating the vital force. In Western medicine, we are told that we are victims of some germ, of some bad genetics, bad genes, right? And that we have no power to change any of this, and that we have to go to someone in order to understand what's happening in our own bodies and our own minds. And then they will tell us how we are doing. So it's a very disempowering system, as opposed to when you go to, for example, a homeopath who is listening on all levels to all the symptomology. When that remedy that matches the symptoms is given, then that remedy activates the vital force. It doesn't impose, it doesn't take over. It simply is a catalyst that informs the vital force to move into gear and to start to do whatever needs to be done in the body and the mind in order to return us back to balance. That is the job of the vital force. That is nature within us, because nature is the healer. But in the Western medical model, we're told that the doctor is the healer, and that drugs, surgery, etc., that is what we all need in order to be healthy. But here we are all these years later, and we're finding that we're all getting sicker and sicker in the Western culture. Yes, medicine is part of it. Also, the food supply is part of it, because there's so many chemicals now and pesticides in the food, in the water. And so we are being affected by all of that. So yes, the energy medicine is important, but also how do I get into my body these nutrients that are high frequency nutrients, organic, free of pesticides, as much as possible, local, right? So there is a connection between the frequency of the remedy we're putting into the body and also the frequency of the food we're putting into our bodies. You can't just rely on energy medicine to heal you if your diet and nutrition is not of a high caliber. If you're toxifying oneself, with these substances that are even non-food-like substances, then it doesn't matter how much great energy medicine you take, you're always going to be brought down by the low quality of food. So that should be, with this group, that should already be a given of the importance of food as medicine, number one. But in terms of the energy medicine, that vital force being stimulated and catalyzed is all that's needed to bring forth healing in the mind and the body. Because nature knows how to do what she does. Man thinks he knows what he's doing with medicine. Man thinks he knows what he's doing with all these drugs. But it's veritably impossible to know what's happening with all of these drugs that are being given, and then the side effects of these drugs, and then the interactions of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus with each other, and the side effects of all those, it's impossible to know the impact that these drugs are having on the health of the body and the mind, and also the health of the children that come following the parents who are on these medicines. So energy medicine has the capacity to transform us from the inside out like nobody's business, because nature knows exactly what needs to happen. Nature is the healing intelligence within this whole universe. And that's why it behooves us to align with the natural order of things and allow ourselves to begin to understand energy medicine like homeopathy and flower essences, so that when we go out of balance, what is it I need to do to bring myself back into balance? How do I become my own physician? How do I become my own healer? We all have that capacity. Folk medicine used to be the #1 medicine, and it was a medicine that was passed on from generation to generation. And somehow that medicine has been lost, somewhat lost, maybe majorly lost. And so when we study different forms of holistic medicine and energy medicine, then when we go out of balance, we have a tool that can be used to bring ourselves back into balance. So when the hurricane came to Asheville here, for 10 days, I had no electricity, I had no water, no internet. And it was the flower essences that saved me. It was the flower essences that kept shifting my consciousness every time I would go into a state of fear or despair, like what's going to happen? When's electricity to come back on? Like I kept collapsing in the unknown, in the fear of the unknown. But each time I would take my flower essences and it would bring me back to this present moment. It would bring me back to neutral. And in that place, I knew everything was going to be okay. Everything was going to be fine. And the importance of that is my mind is creating reality. So if I kept staying in that worry and fear state, I would have created and generated everything I was worried and feared about. I would have kept doing that to such an extent that the intensity of that thought process would create form. It would create my reality. And may have been 2 weeks, 3 weeks before anything happened. But instead, I stayed neutral because of the energy medicines, and I started to visualize everything going back on board. I started to feel and experience everything is working out perfectly. Because everything is energy, and my mind is creating constantly. So instead of creating and generating a negative experience, I envisioned something positive. And I was in a very happy state when friends were over, when the electricity just popped on 10 days later. Like, I was like, oh, great, electricity's back. That's awesome. I was neutral when it was off, and I was still neutral when it was on. That neutral state is where we wish to be, because that's the state when our vital force can do its best work. When we are in a stressed out state, a worried state, a feared state, then the vital force is losing a lot of energy. This is why having awareness of these energetic medicines, or having a practitioner who works with energy medicine, is really important in one's life. But at this stage in the game, I would just say to do your own research as well with herbology, with flower essences, with homeopathy. Learn about the basics of all of this stuff so you have it on hand for whenever anything happens, And then with the knowledge of how to work with these things, you'll be able to take care of yourself.